Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope all of you are still awake. Now, we are really pleasantly surprised to see so many of you staying back. That's great. Now, after hearing so many speakers talking about BMI, my president thought it was a body mass index, and the minister thought BMI has two issues, the soft and hard issues, and some of the speakers here alluded that BMI is both create, capture, and deliver values. Now, let me just confuse the whole subject of BMI further by sharing with you a story. Now, how many of you heard about this David and Goliath story? Okay, I think some of you are Christians or Muslims, you probably heard about it, or when you're school children, you probably read about it in storybooks. Now, there's lessons we learn from this story, David and Goliath. Now, how did David beat Goliath? He actually uses business model innovation. David had innovation. Remember, he has this slingshot, and that was actually the innovation of the day, anti-ballistic missile. David had productivity because he trained. He could use the slingshot and kill wolves and lions to protect the sheep because he was a shepherd. So he has good productivity. David overcome fear, the mindset to take on Goliath. He overcome the corporate culture because King Saul asked him to wear the gown and the big sword and so forth. He said, no, I want to do it my way, But that wasn't good enough. All right? He still needed the last thing. Because he had the innovation, he has the productivity, but if he hits Goliath at the wrong spot, it will not work. He hit Goliath right at the forehead where he was not protected, and that knocked out Goliath. So there you are, a very simple story on business model innovation using the David and Goliath story. Okay, now let's go on to the questions. Now I want to establish some ground rules. First rule is the priorities are given to questions from the floor. Okay, the fact that you come forward, ask questions means that you're so passionate, you're so bold about it. So I give you a top priority. Second priority will be those that submitted earlier on the pigeonhole. Okay, and being the moderator, I've got a lot of questions, but unfortunately, I'm given the third priority. When you don't ask, I don't get questions. Then I ask questions from what I got here. Okay, so let's open up to the floor. Please tell us your name, where you come from. Okay, before you ask the question, and please make your questions short because I noticed there are a lot of questions already submitted earlier. Come on, any questions on the floor? Who wants to get started? Nobody? Okay, then let's start. For the benefit of time, let's go on to the screen. Okay, those who submitted earlier. Okay, great presentations. I'm SME with only 10 staff, okay, which is quite typical of many SMEs here in Singapore. Limited resources, etc., etc. Now, how can I get started? Okay, and related questions on this is, I'm a small company. How does BMI work for me? Okay. Now, I will just be a bit democratic at the outset, so I'll just leave it open to any of the panel speakers to answer this question. Somebody take on? Yeah, Scott.
So I'm happy to take a first stab at it, and I'm sure the panel will build on what I say, but I would suggest for a small company, a resource-strapped company, there really are two things that you want to do. The first is you want to make sure that you document your current business model. One common thing that we see is if you ask people, what is your business model today, they actually are unable to answer that very basic question. So whether it's using the business model canvas that you saw outside, or just doing the very simple explanation of how exactly do you create value for your customer, how do you deliver that value to them, and how do you capture it for yourself, first make sure you document it. The next question then is to understand where is there the greatest opportunity for business model innovation. In my mind, that's asking two very simple questions. Who should be consuming our product but doesn't? So who are people who have plenty of money, who might know about us, but we're not winning against competitors? Might we find different ways to compete? The next question is who can't consume what we currently offer? Because what we offer is too expensive, it's too complicated, or they can't access it. In either of those cases, there are opportunities to maybe push or innovate your business model. So that's at least where I would start. And thank you for saying the presentations were great, at least the other presenters.
Okay, I'll stick my question in, also connected to this issue. A lot of SMEs are what we call traders, distributors, and agents, middlemen. Okay, and that role is being marginalized today. Okay, because it's so easy for manufacturers to go directly to consumers. So I want to pose this question to Richard because it's talk about revenue model. What kind of revenue model can our SMEs embark on in the light of the fact that their role as a distributor agent is being marginalized?
Okay. Well, I think it will be advisable for companies that want to explore business model innovation to be familiar with the types of innovative revenue model. There are actually, according to some research, there are 8 types. Other research says that there are 22 types, whatever the case. So maybe a good starting point is for SME who are distributor, wholesaler, those that involve the middleman, and because of internet, they could be marginalized, to firstly see what are the revenue model that's out there, right? And to see to what extent it can be adapted to them.
Okay, any questions relating to this? Because this is a big subject, okay? We could actually narrow down.
Can I add a thought on this area?
Yeah.
So one of the things that you always suggest that people who are distributors or play a middleman role in an industry is to really seek to understand at a more fundamental level the people that they're delivering things to. What are some of the problems they can't solve today? What are some of the jobs that they're trying to get done? And I'll give a very simple example of a US company that used this line of thinking. So Best Buy is one of the world's largest consumer electronics retailers, and historically it was a pure middleman. You came in and you bought products from other companies. But about 10 years ago, they saw this tiny startup in their backyard in the state of Minnesota that was providing a service. The startup was called Geek Squad, because they observed that as more and more people bought these expensive televisions or they got Wi-Fi routers, they were really struggling to install it and have it all work within their home. So Best Buy executed, in my mind, one of the best acquisitions in corporate history. They paid about $5 million for Geek Squad, which today produces close to $2 billion in revenues. So they understood a new problem that emerged in their marketplace and found a service-based offering that went beyond traditional distribution that allowed them to deliver against that problem and make a lot of money.
Okay. Right. Any questions from the rest speaker? Any response?
Yeah, a couple of comments. In terms of just the first question on size, I think it's important to recognize that scale and innovation has very little correlation. In fact, you see that a lot of large organizations are being burdened by the size and the bureaucracy. So I'll suggest that, when you are a small company, think of using your size as an advantage because you can move much faster and you can mobilize your organization a lot more effectively. Maybe just a comment on the intermediaries and the distributor model. I think traditionally, distributor model exists because of information asymmetry and distribution reach. And as the panelists rightly point out, with progress and internet interface and so on, it's becoming more and more difficult to become an intermediary. But you see that the best distributors are actually using this advantage. The best distributors are the people who are actually using information to create stickiness with their customers. Some of them build EDI interface and so forth to make sure that they are becoming an integral part of the supply chain rather than an inconvenient part of the supply chain. So in many aspects, when you think about it, you can think of it as information innovations or process innovation, but it's really around changing your business model to be someone who's not just about supplying the goods, but also supplying the information that's needed to move the goods from one end of the supply chain to the other end of the supply chain.
Okay. I just want to share this. I kind of mentioned just now, if you are a middleman and so on, you want to look at the very innovative business model out there or in relation to revenue model. Let me share one, which I thought is very innovative. The company is Quidbids, Q-U-I-B-I-D-S, quidbids.com. Very, very interesting revenue model. It's called a penny auction site, where they are actually selling iPad, for example. iPad retail price could be US $699, but they're selling it at US $23.01. So how do they do it? They actually have, so if you want to bid for this item, you will have to firstly purchase or pay a fee to bid, and each bid will cost you 60 cents, right? So can you imagine a situation when you have 2,000 people that bidded for the iPad? So 2,000 and each one paying 60 cents, how much would that be? $1,200, right? And this is a lot more than the price of iPad, and they can actually literally give the iPad away. And this is really innovative, so something for you to explore. You may not have to adopt it, but you may want to look at it and see to what extent you can adapt and to innovate on it. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll do it quick because there's only two things that I think you want to do when you are small. And I speak as a small company, a Singapore small company, so I know it from ourselves. Basically, there's two things, as I mentioned. One is the culture statement, and that is not very difficult. Those are 5 behaviors, 5 values, 5 behaviors that you want to see every single employee in your company have. I mentioned juice, joy, intuition, and so forth. But once you picked it, then you got to live it. And once you made it something tangible, something you can eat, something you can touch, something you can put everywhere, okay? So that's the first thing, live your culture. Second thing is, I showed the big racing car, and of course that's for huge companies, right? We have another, and I'd be happy to share it with you. Anybody who wants it, we can email it. It's basically 6 behaviors that makes you more innovative. And this one you can do. We've done it as a calendar called the Innovators Calendar. So for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and so forth. Every one behavior every day. And we call it the pedals. Because as a small company, a small medium-sized company, you may not be a racing car yet or a big truck, like we saw some of the companies. You may be a bicycle, but you can still drive very fast. And using the right mindset, having a strong culture statement, and then exercising innovative behavior every day, every week, every month, will make you go much faster than your competitors.
Okay, any questions from the floor? No, let's move on to the next question on Pigeonhole. 10 votes, wow, a lot of questions, a lot of you asking this. Any government funds to support my company's venture into business model innovation, business model change? Now, I think this question is best posed to any of the government agencies that are represented here. Anybody here? Well, if not, then maybe I have to answer this, huh? since we are representing some of the government incentives. Okay, let me put it this way. As far as we know right now, there's none per se, just for business model. But let me share with you what actually some of the funding can help you. A lot of business model change comes from cross-industry experiences. Okay? There's so much you can do within industry. What are the tricks and trade that you know in industry, your competitors know them too. Right? And increasingly today, you'll find that industries are learning from one another. Okay? And that's where, when, for example, through SMF, okay, we do have what they call independent consultancies and so forth that's provided to many of you SME through our various centers like SME centers and so forth. And these consultants come from different backgrounds and different industries. Tap upon them because they can share with you, right, some of the ideas that they garner from the past industry experience, which you may be able to apply in your particular industries. That's how, this is one of the ways that business model innovation can take place. Learning from other people's industries and apply to your industry. And this is happening all over. The banking are learning from manufacturing. In fact, manufacturing are learning from service, retail, and what have you. Okay? So that's how we go about doing it. And the other scheme that was alluded by the minister this morning, we have this enterprise training support. Okay, now I'm selling on behalf of WDA is also one of our supporters. Okay, and through this program, okay, they can deploy HR consultancy and so forth to assist you. Okay, remember Christine was talking, quite a number of speakers here alluded to the importance of corporate culture and so forth. You know, okay, the change of corporate culture mindset and so forth. And that's where the HR consultancy can come in. So indirectly, yes, there are some sort of funding and support from the government already on business model change. I declare my interests. Okay, we are not from the government. I'm not working with the government. I'm working with SMF. Okay, but these are the available funds they can draw upon. Okay, I hope that answers.
I just wanted to pick on one, not pick on, I wanted to build on one comment you made, just to make a general point. One of the things you said is the government can help to encourage cross-industry learning. And if you look at any study about where great ideas come from, any study, you will find a common element, and that is the breakthroughs always occur at intersections, when different mindsets and different skills collide. You don't need government support to go and learn from other industries. You have networks here that you can tap into, you've got friends, you've got family, but when you're wrestling with an innovation problem, when you've got a challenge in your head, going and seeing what other great revenue model innovators have done or what other people in this ecosystem have done can be one of the quickest ways to get fresh insight on that problem without having any spending involved at all.
Okay, any other questions from the floor? Okay, that gentleman. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Dr. Christopher Vass from Murdoch University. We constantly talk about achieving win-win solutions. Scott just mentioned ideas at the intersection. We talk about government funding. We talk about SME supply chains. I just wonder, what's the role of large corporations in supporting SMEs to move up the supply chain and transform the supply chain into value chains? Singapore being a small country, what's the role of organizations like GE and P&G and a few others in terms of moving some of the SMEs in those sectors to be more competitive? And I'm just curious to know the panel's observations on some of those issues.
Jeffrey, I guess this question is for you.
More and more industries do, or rather parts of the industry do compete on an ecosystem basis. And what it really means is that you're seeing more and more tighter integrations of the upstreams and the downstreams across the value chain. But I think for that to happen, the SME needs to have the right capabilities and the right propositions to be part of that ecosystem. And I think that happens a lot when you are, doing manufacturing, maybe less so on the service side, and definitely a lot less so on the being the distributors or the intermediaries. In fact, a classic case is, for example, if you look at the automobile industry, essentially the OEMs, build the ecosystems around it. Over the years, they've consolidated the suppliers from tens of thousands to a few in each component, and so it's actually looking more and more like the traditional Japanese Keiretsu system, except it's a lot more efficient with a lot fewer participants. So I think from some of my conversations with large companies operating here, there's always, obviously, they forge global partnerships. They are also very interested in going deep into local markets. But it's important for them to be able to find those capable or ambitious SME partners who are willing to step up and to become part of the system. Else is there are actually very little incentives for them to go and develop them. It has to be really the other way around. I also know of cases where, very often through some government support, when some of the large Singapore-based companies went overseas, what they try to do is to create a little bit of like a consortium, a Singapore Inc. consortium, where some of the smaller players become part of a consortium with anchor large Singapore-based companies. I think we're seeing some activities in that directions, some success, but I think it is still very much early days. So it's really very much depending on the ambitions and the capabilities of those SMEs who want to participate in that fashion.
Can I?
Yeah, okay, good.
I had a meeting about 2 weeks ago with the CEO of a lingerie manufacturer from Sri Lanka, Mass Holdings. And they're setting up, which is very interesting, from a big company, they're the biggest in Asia producing lingerie, to have hubs. So they set up a hub in Singapore and a hub in I think Shanghai or Hong Kong they're looking at. And these hubs will serve two things. One is to be inspired, open innovation, be inspired from other industries. And second one is to find small companies that they can co-invest with to build new brands. And we see that in many different industries, also in food, and as is a good example of setting up an incubator too, where they're also looking at smaller companies who have great ideas, but not necessarily the big muscle and a lot of money behind them. And I think, as Scott was saying, there's a lot of very big companies that are moving in a direction to be more innovative. They know that they can't beat themselves, and they're looking at smaller and medium-sized companies that they can work together with to co-develop and co-create.
Okay, perhaps I want to jump in on this one because I have some personal passion about this value chain and so forth. What's happening in the manufacturing community, this is my personal view, is that it's being polarized. You either become the manufacturer of the world, like the Chinese, okay, the Indians and so forth, okay, where they can produce low-cost products, or become the factory of the world, like the Germans, the Japanese, which are supplying automation, equipment and so forth to the manufacturer of the factory of the world. All the others are kind of middlemen again, okay, and Singapore, unfortunately, is sort of in that category. But all is not lost, okay, where I think Singapore company can position itself is to be a strong value chain to some of these multinational companies. And because of globalization and so forth, what we are seeing also in the manufacturing world is that the value chain is very important for multinational companies today. We saw some of them moving out of Singapore, for example. They go to China. They bring along the value chain. They bring along the suppliers that supply to them in Singapore into China so they can quick start up and so forth. So to answer the gentleman's question, yes, I think the trend is for you. Okay? And in identifying business model, look at the trend. It's very, very important. Okay? You don't want to be barking on the wrong tree. And that's why we, in SMF, we have a program called, sorry, I got to do a bit of commercialization here, because we are the organizer here. So I think just spend me 2 minutes on this. We have this program called Capacity and Capability Development Program. Just exactly do that, okay? To support the value chain to the multinational. We call it the Queen Bee, okay? And when the Queen Bee, once the value chain, the suppliers upgrade, they have to do so, okay? And we have all kinds of government grants and so forth to help the value chain, SMEs, to support the Queen Bee. Okay, that's all for commercialization. Let's move on. Okay, the next question is, how does BMI help family business startup? How does BMI help family business startup? I guess for Christine, it's more the mindset thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah, as I mentioned, it's really about creating that culture from the beginning. And a lot of people have said that they wish, as a company grew, that they have started with the culture from early days and not have to change it when it gets bigger. And as I mentioned, make the culture a priority, but make it really tangible, something that everyone can explain to their friends and their family and say, I work for this company and we are a juicy culture, or we have there's some great examples. Yeah, I know you guys have STAR. You're giving stars to everybody. Make it something visible and tangible that everyone can agree on. I think that's the biggest and easiest. And you know what? The great news about that is that you don't have to pay anything to create a culture statement. It's basically free. You just have to put in some time and effort, and I would advise everybody to do it. But make sure that you involve all family members, you involve also some employees, so that people are really feeling grounded, that this culture statement or these values, this behavior that you want to see is not just for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, but it's something that's for the long run.
Okay, Scott? Right, any other questions from the floor? Come on, you're given priority, business class or first class. No? Okay, let's move on. BMI is driven by culture. Oh, back to you again, Christine. Yeah. So, how to do it and how do you create that culture? Over to you. Or any of the speakers here.
Well, it's depending. As I mentioned, if you're a startup, then you start with you start defining the culture, really. What kind of behaviors do you want to see within your company? We recommend using 5, because nobody can remember anything more than 5, and it's also easier to make a word, like we made juice, right? You make an acronym, you make something that's easy for people to remember. But secondly, if you're a bigger company, then the circuit is a good start, where you spend probably 2 to 3 years on saying, okay, we are whatever culture you are, very performance driven or very paternalistic or whatever kind of culture you have at the moment. We want to become more innovative, and there's these 8 steps that you can follow to change the culture.
Yeah.
Many innovations really originate from the front line and also from the customers. But in order for these ideas, to flourish into sustainable products and services, the organization must have the structure and the processes to enable for these ideas to become not just merely ideas, but profitable products and ideas. And therefore, and for that to happen, the culture needs to be really set from the top, which is one of the points that I iterated earlier on. Strong leadership commitment from the top is extremely important because that sets the direction, that sets the tone of the organization, that drive changes throughout the organization. And it's only through that good ideas can become actual products and services.
The one thing I would add to this, I agree with all the points that the panelists have said, but you should also take a look as a leader of your organization about whether you really want the culture to change. Because in some cases, you might create a lot of disturbance. You might have a culture that's built around engineering performance or executional excellence or whatever it might be. And if you walk away from that, you can cause great damage to your core business. So in some cases, depending on the organization size, of course, the answer isn't to change today's culture. It's to say, we got this culture, it's great, it's delivering. We're going to have to create a parallel system, a parallel organization, some kind of new entity that can embrace a new culture. The reality is an individual does not change. A species changes because you've got crossbreeding and so forth, genetic mutations, etc. But the individual unit in many cases doesn't change. And if you look at large organizations that have transformed themselves, in many cases it's by going into new businesses and getting out of old businesses. Look at IBM as a very classic example of this. They go into new businesses like services, they exit businesses like hard disk drives and laptops and so on, and the overall corporation transforms, even if each of those individual units might not have changed that much. So you have to step back as a leader and just assess what circumstance you're in before you decide the specific activities you're going to take.
Okay, this is my personal experience. Having spent 30 years in a corporate life, the problem is not with lack of ideas, innovative or productivity ideas or initiatives. There are plenty of ideas, suggestions around. The problem is always implementation, to get it done. This is my personal experience. And what actually impedes a lot of implementation is the corporate culture. Okay, and that's why this is a big issue. This is just my personal view about culture and its impact on the BMI.
If I can just add to that for just a second, to turn off my mic, so I guess I can't add to that. I guess they will let me add to it. That's nice. So I think that's exactly right. I think one of the mistakes that people make is they think that a business model innovation problem or an innovation problem is an ideation problem. But I think Edison had it right. Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. And thank goodness we're in Singapore because we can perspire plenty when we go outside here. But the perspiration is really the hard part of this. And I think in our experience, the single thing you have to do, this goes to one of the BCG findings around portfolio management, is make sure that you really grab hold of the process by which resources get allocated to different efforts. Because at the end of the day, your strategy is not what you think, it's not what you say. Your strategy is what you do. It's where you spend your time, it's where you spend your money. And if you do not grab hold of how resources are allocated, you'll have a million great ideas that never ever go anywhere. And the next time you start talking about innovation, your staff will roll their eyes because they know exactly what will happen.
Okay, any other questions from Richard? Yes, go ahead.
Okay. To me, the business model innovation, there are many components to it, but the culture, if you can foster a culture that encourages innovation, that will give your organization a sustainable competitive advantage. I think first and foremost, culture usually originates from the founder, and the senior management will perpetuate it, right, and then it filters down. But to me, the one hallmark of a culture that fosters innovation is letting go. Top management should be able to let go Of course, there will be check and balance along the way. Control system have to be put in place. But I believe top management really have to empower the staff. Because at the end of the day, like the fellow panelists have shared, innovation usually bubbles up from the rank and files, then when your staff face the customers and so on. So now, let me share with you an example of a company that done very, very well. Within a couple of years, from almost zero, they became a $1 billion organization. And Amazon bought over it. It's Zappos, right? It's the largest online retailer for shoes, right? And Zappos CEO Tony highlighted that culture is the one that actually enables Zappos to grow, right? And basically, he empowered his staff. And, let me share with you a very interesting story, right? They make sure that in terms of the recruitment part, they recruit people that share the values and the culture of the organization, to the extent that even though they shortlisted staff and they put staff through the orientation program, they actually, at the end of the orientation program, the newly hired staff is given an option to quit the company, and they were paid US $2,000 bonus to quit the company if they felt that somehow they cannot fit into the culture. So to Tony, the CEO of Zappos, this is absolutely critical. You need to make sure that the staff that are coming in, your new recruits and so on, they can, their DNA is the same as that of the organization, and they believe firmly as to the values of the organization. Thank you.
On the other hand, I may add the great example. Diversity is also important. What they do in Zappos is that they, for example, in the employment interviews, they send a driver to pick up the candidate. And then after the interview, they will also interview the driver and ask, so this guy, was he nice to you? Was he chatty? Was he somebody who was basically, their mentor is delivering happiness? Was he somebody who was happy, or was it somebody who was really rude or didn't talk to you or whatever? And you know what? The rude guys will never get the job. So they use this way of making sure that they have the right people. I must say that in Singapore, diversity is a really great inspiration for innovation and innovation culture. And that's why I'm a big, actually, against conferences and events where everyone dresses the same. Like once you put that suit and tie on, I think that sometimes the creative juice stops a little bit in many ways, and we become very corporate, right? We become like, oh, we have to look good, we have to say the right thing, and so forth. And innovation culture is about embracing failure. It's about being silly sometimes. It's about trying things that nobody else has tried before, and you can't do that and wear a suit at the same time. Sorry.
Okay, any other questions from the floor? Jen? Yes. Take your opportunity to ask your individual question, because outside this meeting is going to be very expensive for you to ask these folks. Huh?
Good afternoon. My name is Chin Nick. I'm from a medium-sized food manufacturer. I must say, occasionally my company will come out with innovative product that we want to sell in our own brands to the retailers. But a lot of times, as we showcase the product to them, they say, I like your product, but can you do it private label for me? And with this question, we're always stuck, because when we first designed the product to have certain business revenue coming in that way, we always faced with this dilemma. Should we take on their brand and do the product in the name, or continue with our own model where we believe that we have a very good product and sell to the market, but we are a medium-sized company that has limited resources to market that. So which would be a better options for us?
Sounds like a revenue model issue.
Well, this is my personal view. If there's money to be made, why not go for it? But of course, of course, your company have to be mindful of the branding, right? So much is very important that whichever organization that you are manufacturing for, meaning to say you are OEM, right? There is no conflict of interest, meaning to say you are not producing something whereby this client can use it to compete with you. You have to be very mindful of that. But if let's say there's no conflict of interest, why not? After all, it will help you to boost your production volume. There's economy of scale to bring down your costs. Yeah.
So I'll make 2 additional comments. So the first comment that I would make is you had an assumption in what you said, which is we have limited marketing resources. That might be a fact, but the assumption might be we can't do much marketing because we have limited resources. I would at least ask you to think about that assumption, because there are a whole bunch of tools and approaches and perhaps even innovative business models that could allow you to do a lot of marketing for not very much money, which could allow you to break what appears to be a trade-off to you. Either I go private label and I can free ride under the retailer or distributor's brand and marketing spend, or I end up with something that's very small. So perhaps there's a way to break out of it. And then more generally, whenever I'm asked a question, should I do A or B? I don't know your business. I have no idea what the answer is. What I try to do is turn each of the questions into a testable hypothesis. So what would you have to believe to prefer A over B? And vice versa, what would you have to believe to prefer B over A? And is there any way to design a low-risk experiment where instead of it being opinion versus opinion, the data determines it, because you run the experiment and it has told you what the answer is. So that's at least the way I think about questions like that.
Wow, we've got so many questions. Looks like I don't think we can cover them all. Okay, what I will do is there's one last question which I'm going to pose to all the speakers here. And for the rest of the questions that we cannot answer you, okay, just before you leave, please get hold of these folks here. They are the experts. Okay, get a link card, and then you pose a question to them, right, by email or what have you, you know. And depending on their good reasons, whether they will charge you, I'll leave it to you, okay? Nothing to do with SMF. Okay, I thought the question is quite interesting, which I also mentioned, you know. 8 votes for them, my goodness, okay? Still unclear about BMI. Can you explain in layman terms? All right. That's why I started by saying that, you know, there's so many definitions of BMI. Now, just to make it quick, because I don't have much time, I want to go through every speaker here. Tell us in layman terms, and what's one takeaway about BMI that you want to share with the audience? Okay? Shall we start with Richard, then go down the line?
Okay, thanks. I would like to reiterate the 3V diagram that I have. A business model is a holistic way of doing business, and you can actually have a grasp of it in terms of, firstly, what is the value your company is providing to your customer. But after providing the value, it's very important that your company is able to capture this value, and that's through the revenue model, right? And the company must be able to continually create value. So, you know, it's a very dynamic kind of a cycle. And there are many building blocks to a business model. So each building block, there could be innovation on it. So that is a business model innovation to me. Thanks.
Thanks. So I think all of us are going to sound a bit similar. I think I'll just share with you the BCG world, you know, how we think about business model. I mean, for us, there are really 6 elements to the business model. One is the target customer segments. You know, who are the target customers you are going after, the value propositions, and your revenue model, which you know, we have spoken quite a fair bit about. And then you have the second half of it, the other 3 components, which is really around your cost base, your asset base, and the processes that you take for you to deliver the products and services. And then for us, the way to think about it, you know, when you change only one of the 6 elements, it is really just either revenue innovations or process innovations or, you know, asset optimizations. It's only when you change 2 or more of them, you know, 2 or more of the 6 elements that I spoke about, then that's what, you know, at least in my world, we consider as business model innovations. And that's difficult to do, right? You can optimize one, you can innovate in one dimension, but it's always difficult to optimize or innovate in 2 or more dimensions. But this is really also areas where, you know, when you do that, you can really create real advantages and gaps relative to your competitors. So that's, I'm not too sure if it's layman enough, but.
Okay, over here.
Okay, I'll do it really layman terms, okay? I would say, this is not very consulting-like, but I would say, if you want to have a layman's term, okay, just think about the same but different.
Okay.
Successful layman's term. So the definition that we use is about the same as the one that Richard started with, creating, capturing, and delivering value. So the overlay that I would offer is to remember what the great Peter Drucker said. The purpose of a business is to create a customer. So at the end of the day, the reason why you're doing this in many cases is because you want to create a new customer, or you want to find a different and better way to serve customers that you're currently serving. So we always suggest that as you think about any form of innovation, you really put the customer, their need, the job they're trying to get done, you really put that at the center of everything that you do. Because we often forget about the customer inside businesses. You always start there when you're forming a business, but then you start to think, we're not serving customers, we're selling products, or we're not selling products, we're just counting stacks of money, which is not a bad thing to do. But remember to put the customer in the center of the innovation equation.
Okay, I think we ended up on the right note. So it looks like many of you cannot go home because you still don't understand BMI. If some of you want to get further confused, do stay back because we have a second session, right? Okay, thank you so much for your time. Okay?